Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine Podcast Radio. You're about to listen to an episode of Tech Done Different podcast with Ted Harrington. Do you follow the pack or challenge the status quo? Join Ted as he explores how to succeed by going against conventional wisdom. You'll hear leaders in technology and security tell stories about how they achieve their success by doing things differently. Knowledge is power. Now, more than ever.
CrowdSec, the collaborative and open source cybersecurity solution. Analyze behaviors, respond to attacks, and share signals across the community for free. Let's make the internet safer together. Learn more at crowdsec.net.
Welcome to another episode of Tech Done Different. As always, I'm your host, Ted Harrington, and with me here today is our special guest, Rashid Ahmed, the CISO of Velocity Group USA. Rashid, thanks for being on the show, man.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, man. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to have you tell us a very rare story, which is a success story. You know, all too often when we think about security stories, they are cautionary tales. And that makes sense that that's not a bad thing. It's just there's more of them. It's more vivid to say like, hey, when this thing failed, here's what we learned from that. Security is pretty hard to have success stories because it's usually like, we didn't get hacked. And does that mean it's because we did a good job or what? But you have a really interesting success story to share with us that has to do with ransomware. So can you paint the picture and start walking me through it? And I'm going to ask you questions as we go.
Sure. So basically this started January of 2020, right before COVID hit. So basically I was asked to come in to this organization out here in New York to take a look at their systems. They were just acquired by another company, and one of the owners left, and bad business relationships between the organization and vendors and a whole bunch of stuff. So basically I was asked to come in because they had to basically move out of the building. It was critical for them to move out of the building. So they wanted me to take a look at the security, take a look at their infrastructure, take a look at what they had, and see if I can help them get this accomplished. So one of my buddies actually asked me to help them out. They really needed help to get this thing going, and he was a little worried. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I'll go and take a look. So when I got there, I looked around, I looked at their network room, I looked at, people, processes, see what they have. Cause I don't know nothing. I have absolutely no idea. I'm going in blind, completely blind. I don't know anybody. Nobody knows me. I'm getting the evil eye, when I'm walking through the halls, because like, who's this dude?
They think this guy's going to make my life harder or take my job or recommend I get fired or.
Oh, dude, you have no idea what I was up against. Yeah. And by the way, all of the above, what you just mentioned. So, I'm going around, I'm looking at everything. And, what I see was, I started sweating, I had beads coming down. I'm like, okay, this is going to be challenging just because, we have a company that's 50 years old that has people from, all age groups that don't understand technology and really don't understand security at all. Passwords were just, hey, it's ABCD, hey, it's 1, 2, 3. And everybody had stickies on their, on their monitors with all the passwords and everything. So I'm just walking around, just trying to understand, what I'm getting myself into here. And basically I knew right away that, this is going to be some work. So basically the biggest driver here was they had to move out of that building ASAP because the owners, they had to evacuate the building for whatever reasons. And that was top priority. I asked them what they had, how they were planning on doing it. And they were talking about, backups. They were doing backups to an external hard drive, but they couldn't get the backups working because they had files that was probably about, 100 gigabytes or 200 gigabytes worth of data. And the files were nested. When I mean nested, I mean nested. If you started a copy, it was definitely going to fail. It was guaranteed to fail. And I don't care which software utility you were using, Linux, Windows, Macs, I don't care. It was not happening. This thing was not going to copy everything. You would get a lot of it, but it wasn't copying everything. So one of the questions was, hey, why don't we just shut down the machine and just, move it across? Now, the challenge there was The IT guy there basically said that if that server, and this is the production server, this is their ERP system, their CRM, this is everything, by the way. They basically, so their IT guy basically said that if this system shuts down, it most likely will not come back up. And he basically brought a little bit of fear into the organization, because when, talking to people, their concern was that, if we shut down this machine, it won't come back up, and we can't make any backups. We can't do any type of regular backups, like file copy type backups. It was just not possible.
So they were sort of locking themselves into a situation where they're fully dependent on a single point of failure without any sort of backup capability.
Exactly. So now the challenge was, we had to get out of there. We had to move the stuff over. Oh, and by the way, their firewalls were, out of the box, Best Buy type regular firewall. There was no real type of equipment there. It was just off the shelf regular stuff. All ports are opened here. Everybody's remote desktoping into the internal network openly. Like it was chaotic. It was chaotic. Thank God I can say it was chaotic. But yeah, so basically. And this is where I had the opportunity to sit down with the owner, and this is important because the owner of this organization, he called himself an IT guy, and truth be told, I love the guy now. He's awesome. He's a great guy. I love him to death. I'll give him my left arm, no problem. But, he understood IT at a very, very extreme high level. But when it came down to it, the technical aspect, he didn't really understand. And understandable, he's a business owner. I completely get it,
You probably shouldn't need to know those things. I mean, that's the point of leadership. You surround yourself with the experts in all the domains, and then you just point the ship in the right direction.
Exactly. So I sat there. I understood what was going on, So I sat him down. I said, hey, listen, this is the truth of the matter. And the first thing I started off with was, there's no FUD here. I'm not trying to create any type of fear, no uncertainty, no doubt. I am just going to give you options, what your available options are, and you can tell me whichever way you want to go, and we'll take it from there. And I explained to him the situation, and I also explained to him it's really nobody's fault the way things are going. Nobody was trained. There was no leadership. The whole. I'm sure your listeners here have heard this a gazillion times, and I don't want to bore them to that, but it's the classic,
They're probably feeling this pain themselves right now as they're listening to this.
Yeah, I'm sure they're cringing right now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so your typical story here. So I sat him down, hey, this is your options. And one of the things I actually talked to him about was, talking about the moving process, what opportunities we had. And one of the opportunities that we had at the time was, if we were going to move to a new environment, let's get real equipment, real firewalls that, that have a purpose, that can we can start building a fabric off of, and, have some sort of security. We can't, I couldn't build everything overnight. I wish I could have just snapped my finger, had a SIM here, IDP here, like the whole beautiful, I wish, but reality, obviously that's not going to happen because they were on a tight budget and the whole nine. So sat down, talked to him. Hey, let's start with this. We need to get circuits into this new place, wherever this new place is. Let's start talking about, building out, IPs, let's start talking about hardware, what we're going to do. Oh, and let's get all new computers, because it's safe. I do not want to go in with the same set of equipment and just put it onto this brand new environment. I want to try to have at least new PCs, new servers, if we can. And at this point, actually, I was trying to talk to him about the cloud, and there's a reason for that. The idea was to try to take the servers and move them over here. But remember, they had the fear in their mind from the old tech IT guys. Basically, in their mind, they had a stuck thinking that if that server shuts down, it's going to basically die, And I wasn't worried about that, because he was shutting down the machines, he was rebooting them, and there was a whole process going on. And I wasn't afraid of that. However, now this is the dilemma that I was stuck in. If for whatever reason, the day of moving the server over, the stupid thing actually died, then he could have turned around and said, "Oh, I was right," and now I'm in a pickle. So I needed to hedge myself against that. And the only way I could have hedged against myself that was taking their system, creating a bit-to-bit copy, deduplication, and moving it into the cloud. And particularly in this case, it was Azure, and it's not a plug. It's only because the environment that they were currently in was Microsoft. So it just makes sense to move them over to a Microsoft type environment. Integration would have been easy, a whole bunch of things would have been just a lot more simpler. I didn't want to, put it in Amazon and start building stuff. And then the integration between Microsoft, I didn't want to deal with it. Plus, time was ticking. I had literally 2.5 weeks to figure all this out because the third week we were moving or something like that. I only had like a month's worth of time basically altogether.
So you basically came into a situation with an IT problem / kind of physical inventory problem combined with a leadership deficiency when it came to understanding IT problem. You haven't even mentioned security yet, by the way. And so you're trying to solve the IT problem with an IT solution, and it delivers a security benefit inherently.
Exactly. So
tell me that part of the story.
The security part, I'm sorry, the security part, the firewall aspect, which part were you mentioning?
Well, I want to hear about the ransomware. I want to get to that.
Oh, you want to get to the ransomware? Okay, so basically the point I was trying to make was I'm going in here blind. Everything, there's a whole bunch of problems, right? I'm going in here blind. And they have a bunch of technical folks that are on board, and I can use them to help with whatever I need to get done, right? So I have a guy for the cloud, I have a guy for on-prem, and I have a few other guys that I'm working with. By the way, there's no processes, there's nothing here. I'm just trying to get things going. It's basically off the shelf, just trying to get things done. So basically we move over, we move everything over, everything's successful, everything's beautiful. And during the middle of this entire thing, as we're going, putting this together, I find out maybe towards the end when we move in that, I want to say it was about 3 weeks in, I get a call one morning saying that our machines this application isn't starting up. This is, by the way, this is 6 a.m. now. This is a 6 a.m. call. Application isn't starting up. And generally, this application does have problems. And generally, we need to just restart the server and life is peachy. I'm like, okay, you know what? Just restart it. Whatever. Have a nice life. I'm off. Call me back. Sorry. I tried restarting it. It's still not happening. I'm like, what the hell? Then I'm thinking DNS issues because we were having some DNS issues. I'm like, oh, check the DNS. DNS, no, that's fine. I'm like, what the hell? I'm like, everything's great. There's nothing wrong. So I'm like, all right, let me, and I'm driving to work, by the way, 6 a.m. driving to the office. So I have this guy on the phone, this other tech on the phone, and I'm like, do me a favor. Can you see just browse onto the C drive, see what's going on? And I hear him go, uh-oh.
Not a good uh-oh.
No. And I tell you, my heart literally sank to my stomach when he said, uh-oh. I'm like, oh, okay, what happened? He goes, there's a file here. And it says something here. And right there, instantly, I knew what was going on. And I'm like, okay, let's see how bad this is. I'm like, can you please start browsing the drive and start taking a look at this and see what's going on? So he's going through the drives. He's like, oh, yep, it's all encrypted, everything, all the files, the folder that basically is the ERP system and the CRM system and everything. It's basically a folder. It's all encrypted. It's all done for. And this is 6 a.m., by the way. So we basically I'm driving to the office. I get to the office. I'm like, you know what? Let me jump in. Let me take a look and let me see what's going on. By the time I get to the office, where I take a look, yep, sure enough, it's encrypted. We can't do anything. It's basically locked out.
Did you have any sort of notification from the perpetrator for this? How did you?
So yeah, basically it was a message saying that, contact us, here's your code. They were nice enough to give us a special code, they were very generous.
Customer service, right?
Customer service, yeah. They gave us a unique code that would identify us, and that would basically, on their back end, give them, tell us, hey, this is their files and whatnot. That's where we were at the time. Just basically got everybody on the team, whichever. I had 1, 2, 3. They had about 2 or 3 guys on the call. Again, level 1 guys, very basic guys, just trying to understand and basically assess the situation. We know it's a ransomware. They had old backups, but those backups obviously weren't functioning on-prem. But as we moved into the cloud, and this was part of the story I wanted to actually get to. This was the saving grace of the story is we had talked about with leadership about instead of doing backups every month or every week, I asked, let's do that every day. It cost a little bit more money. It was absolutely worth it at the end. So basically what we did was we looked at our infrastructure. We looked at everything. Yes, it's encrypted. We try to go through the log files and try to see, what happened, how they got in, what was going on. And I don't know if you want to make this a long story short, but basically they came through the internet from an open RDP session and the credentials were available online. That's how they basically were able to get in. And then once they got in, obviously it was easy. It was cake. They were able to install everything and whatnot, blah, blah, blah. And the crazy thing about this is when I first came in, we tried to change the passwords. And this is another trap. I guess I was in. I couldn't change the passwords. We couldn't change the password because a lot of the service accounts, they were all dependent on each other. They used, instead of creating a service account for a particular service, they would use their own passwords, and they never changed their passwords. And that whole spiel. So basically they were stuck now. They were at a point where they had to change their passwords. There's nothing that we couldn't do because it was out in the open. We had to go back to all the application, get everybody on the team. We had to make sure we changed all the passwords. And the biggest hole was port 3389 was open on the firewall and allowing access. That was actually initially closed when this was set up. But during the time, within 2-3 weeks, remember, this business has no processes. There's nothing. People just do things at a whim. The owners say something, the people just respond because they're the owners, and it gets done. There's no process. So they inadvertently opened up everything, basically everything inside to this particular server. And, that's how they basically got in at the end of the day. We found out, went through logs, looked at the firewall, looked at all the information, and basically locked everything up. Once we locked everything up, we started obviously building. Actually, that was a perfect, well, I don't want to say it was perfect, but it was scary. Thank God we had backups. I thought we were going to have we were going to have a different conversation with these guys. And basically I was going to tell them, hey, you got to shut down. I really thought we would be saying that, but these guys, they were opportunistic. They were only looking for an opportunity. Had they stuck around for a couple of weeks more, a couple of days more, they could have actually ventured out and did a lot more damage. But knock on wood, it didn't go there. At that point, we got really lucky because they only stopped there. They had the ability to do a lot more damage, but I guess somebody was on my side that night or that day or whatever. But that's basically what happened.
So because of this process that you put in place to back everything up, which was to solve that IT problem, when everything was now encrypted because of ransomware, I don't know if we explicitly stated, but this was definitely an attack. An attacker was asking you to pay money to decrypt your files. You were able to go to that Azure instance and basically recreate your entire environment without having to pay the ransom, and you were backup operating very quickly, I believe, right? Like within hours.
Yeah. We were once we figured out, we were literally the company was processing data, customer transaction within 4 hours flat. We were up and running, like at the network, as if nothing had ever happened. That's the state we got back. Literally the night before, we were back up the night before, midnight before we were. And remember this attack happened at 6 a.m. So 6 a.m. is when they were just starting. So I'm glad whatever happened between midnight and 6 a.m. because we had the backups from midnight.
Yeah, that's amazing. And when you think about, by comparison, even when organizations are able to recover from a ransomware attack, whether they pay the ransom or not, but often it takes weeks, months, sometimes longer than that. And what do you think was the linchpin to why you were able to recover so quickly?
It was seriously at the end. I thought back about this, and it was because it was simple. The simple fact that there was no backup, there was no redundancy, they had nothing in place, and we had to move to a new physical environment, and we had this fear of the system going down. Just sitting down and thinking, understanding the risks. I think at the end of the day, that's what it came down to, is understand your risk. I truly understood what the risks were at that point in time and what we had to get done in a short period of time based on this business owner's requirements. And, just making sure I can go back at any moment in time, I think was my absolute saving grace. Because remember, when we moved, we were taking snapshots, we were taking multiple backups, we were doing a bunch of things that we weren't normally doing. Well, not we, what they weren't normally doing. After I came, we changed some process around, and we're still developing. But that was literally, if we would have taken a week backup, we would have been okay. It wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world to re-enter data back. 4 days a week, maybe. It wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world. We would have still been functional. The organization would have still been in business. It would have just sucked, entering all that data in. But just a few dollars more, I was able to create a nightly backup, and that few dollars basically saved the entire organization. And a week's, and technically, let's just say if they said, yeah, we'll do a weekly backup, it saved them 5 days worth of, whatever time and energy that would have taken resource-wise, that was all saved just because we had backups.
So that's an interesting detail to this, where people listening to this can, we can all, like, as they say, sort of Monday morning quarterback, like review the game film of what happened over the weekend and say, what could we have done better? And people might hear that story and say, wow, that does make total sense to me to spend a few more dollars to get the daily backup. Or they might say, you know what, I'm willing to risk the 5 days of manual data entry to be more on like a weekly cadence. But at least now they're making that cost benefit analysis rather than just saying, oh, well, this costs more dollars, without realizing that it also could cost more person hours, which could be exponentially more expensive.
And remember, they were inputting data manually. Now, imagine all the errors along the way too. We haven't put that factor in as well. So there's a whole bunch of ifs that we could put in place. But with the nightly backup, those ifs we technically don't have to worry about. You're good. We were good. I think that the nightly thing really saved us. And like I said, even if you had the weekly, it would have been good. But I think, just to be honest with you, it would have been way too much. I think it would have been even that manual data entry, I think would have been way too much. I don't think it's worth it for that cost, for that little bit more cost, personally.
So I was going to ask you about things that you learned from the story. It sounds like one that is coming through loud and clear is that cost benefit analysis. It sounds like you definitely did some things right. What were the things that you learned that maybe you would do better next time? So someone's listening to this story, they're like, wow, Rashid really saved the day here with this, but there are still things you would have improved upon. What might those things be?
Oh yeah, okay. So let's just go back a little bit. Maybe if I would have spent a little bit more time and said, hey, listen, maybe we need to spend more time on these processes, because I understand, the gaps, the knowledge gaps between all these IT folks. I could have done that maybe a little bit better. Maybe I could have thrown a piece of software in that could have helped me. I mean, there's a whole bunch of what ifs that I can go back and think about. But then, I think about, when I really sit down and I think about it, I'm like, okay, you know what? I did have some challenges that I was faced up against, obviously. So I could have probably done this a little bit better. Maybe if I spent a little bit more time doing this, maybe a little bit more time this, maybe I would have received an alert prior to the actual ransomware attack. You sit down and you think about these things. What if I would have invested the time in a SIM? Would that would have been better? Who knows? But yeah, I think maybe maybe if I would have, I think, spent maybe just a little bit more time in the processes, I think maybe I would have been in a better place. But yeah, I think either that entire process, I would have said, I think that would be the biggest takeaway on my end.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, this is definitely a really cool story. I'm glad we got to feature you and feature this story here on the show. As we come up to the end of our time here, is there any parting wisdom that you want to share with anyone that you learned from this particular experience?
Yes, I'd like to say, I guess we're all faced with challenges. I think just talking out with leadership and just having them understand and just have them see your perspective, I think is absolute key. Just dialogue. It's absolute key. It's the driver in everything. It's the decision between yes and no. And as a security guy, you want that yes. You want to exude that confidence. Hey, this is serious stuff. We need to do this. And they just turn around and listen. So I think dialogue at the end of the day, I think is very important.
I love it. What a powerful idea. Well, Rashid, thank you so much for spending some time with us here together today. You've been great. I love the story.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody listening, if you want to learn more about Rashid or about the podcast itself, just go to tedharrington.com/podcast, and we'll catch you next time.
CrowdSec, the collaborative and open source cybersecurity solution. Analyze behaviors, respond to attacks, and share signals across the community for free. Let's make the internet safer together. Learn more at crowdsec.net.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Tech Done Different podcast with Ted Harrington. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.